The widow's fence was falling apart when Will Tucker first noticed it, though he'd been watching her struggle for weeks from his ranch just over the ridge. It was late September in 1882, and Hillsborough, New Mexico territory, was settling into that brief, golden period between the scorching summer and the cold desert nights of winter. Lila Warren was bent over a fence post, her dark hair escaping from its pins, her faded calico dress dusty from another day of impossible labor. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, but grief and hardship had etched themselves around her green eyes. Her husband had been dead 6 months, thrown from a spooked horse and killed instantly when his head struck a boulder. Thomas Warren had left her with a small ranch, 2 milk cows, a handful of chickens, a vegetable garden that was struggling, and pride that was stronger than steel. Will was 27, tall and lean from years of hard work, with sun-browned skin and dark blonde hair that needed cutting. He'd inherited his ranch from his father 3 years back and had built it into something respectable. He'd noticed Lila before Thomas died, noticed her in that way a man notices a woman even when he knows she belongs to another. After Thomas passed, he'd kept his distance out of respect, but watching her slowly break herself trying to hold everything together was becoming more than he could stand. He rode down to her property that afternoon, his horse's hooves kicking up dust on the dry road. Lila looked up at the sound, shading her eyes against the sun. Her expression went from neutral to guarded in an instant. "Mrs. Warren," Will said, tipping his hat as he reined in his horse. "Mr. Tucker." Her voice was cool, formal. She straightened, holding a hammer at her side like a weapon she might need. "I was riding past and noticed your fence is looking rough. I've got some extra posts and wire at my place. Thought I could bring them over, help you shore things up before winter." Lila's jaw tightened. "That's kind of you, but I can manage my own property." "Didn't say you couldn't, madam, just offering a neighborly hand." "I don't need charity, Mr. Tucker." Her green eyes flashed. "I've been managing just fine on my own." Will looked at the sagging fence, the weeds overtaking what had once been neat corrals, the barn door hanging crooked on its hinges. He looked back at her, taking in the exhaustion she was trying so hard to hide, the calluses on her hands, the thinness in her face that spoke of someone who was feeding her livestock before herself. "Yes, madam," he said quietly. "I can see that." He turned his horse and rode away, but not back to his ranch. He rode into Hillsborough proper, to the general store run by George Martinez, a heavy-set man with kind eyes who knew everyone's business and most of their secrets. "George," Will said, leaning against the counter. "I need you to do me a favor and keep your mouth shut about it." George grinned. "This about the Warren widow. How did you, son? Half the town has watched you watching her for the better part of a year. The other half just ain't paying attention." Will felt heat creep up his neck. "She's struggling out there, too proud to accept help." "Thomas Warren was the same way," George said, his expression softening. "Good man, but stubborn as a mule. Seems his widow inherited that trait. I want to help her, but I need to do it in a way she won't refuse. What are you thinking?" Over the next hour, Will and George hatched a plan. It wasn't perfect, and it required some deception, but Will figured his conscience could bear it if it meant Lila Warren didn't work herself into an early grave. 3 days later, George drove a wagon out to Lila's property. Will watched from a distance, hidden among the cottonwoods along the creek that divided their lands. He saw Lila come out of her house, wiping her hands on her apron, confusion written across her face. George climbed down slowly, his considerable bulk making the wagon springs creak. "Mrs. Warren," he called out cheerfully, "got a delivery for you." "There must be some mistake," Lila said. "I didn't order anything." "No mistake. Your late husband, he paid for these goods before he passed. Been sitting in my back room and I plumb forgot about them until I was doing inventory. My apologies for the delay. Will saw Lila hesitate, saw the war playing out across her face. She knew Thomas, knew he wouldn't have ordered supplies without telling her. But she also needed what was in that wagon, needed it desperately, and the idea that it was already paid for made it easier to accept. "What's in there?" she asked, stepping closer. "Fence posts, wire, some nails. Flour, salt, sugar, coffee, a few other sundries." Thomas had good sense preparing for winter like that. Lila's eyes glistened, and for a moment Will thought she might cry, but she pulled herself together, nodding stiffly. "Thank you, Mr. Martinez. I appreciate you remembering." George helped her unload the supplies, chattering the whole time about the weather and the upcoming harvest festival. When he left, Will saw Lila stand in her yard, staring at the pile of goods, her hand pressed to her mouth. Then she squared her shoulders and got back to work. It became a pattern. Every week, Will found some new way to help without letting Lila know it was him. He paid the blacksmith to accidentally make an extra horseshoe that happened to fit Lila's old mare. He had George deliver more prepaid supplies. He fixed her water pump in the middle of the night when she'd gone into town. He mended the barn door while she was at church on Sunday morning. But Lila Warren was not a foolish woman, and her suspicions grew with each mysterious act of kindness. One evening in late October, Will was working late in his own barn when he heard a horse approaching. He looked up to see Lila riding into his yard, her spine straight, her expression thunderous. "Mrs. Warren," he said, setting down the harness he'd been oiling. "This is unexpected." "Cut the pleasantries, Mr. Tucker." She dismounted in one smooth motion, striding toward him with purpose. "I know it's been you. I don't know what you mean. Do not lie to me." Her voice shook with anger. "George Martinez can't keep a secret to save his life. After 3 whiskeys at the saloon, he told half the town about your little arrangement. It got back to me this afternoon." Will sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Lila, Mrs. Warren," she corrected sharply. "Mrs. Warren, I was just trying to help." "I didn't ask for your help. I didn't ask for anyone's help. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? The whole town knowing that you've been playing benefactor to the poor widow, sneaking around behind my back, making me look like a charity case. That wasn't my intention." "I don't care about your intentions." She was close to him now, close enough that he could see the unshed tears of rage in her eyes. "I have my pride, Mr. Tucker. It's about all I have left. Thomas is gone. Our plans, our future, all of it is gone. But I still have my dignity, and I'll be damned if I let anyone take that from me." "Your pride is going to kill you," Will said quietly. "You're working yourself to death out there. That's my choice to make." "Is it?" He stepped closer, his own temper finally rising. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you're so wrapped up in proving you don't need anybody that you can't see what's right in front of you. And what's that? That needing help doesn't make you weak. That accepting kindness doesn't diminish you. That being alone isn't the same as being strong." Lila's hand came up, and for a moment he thought she might slap him. Instead, she jabbed a finger into his chest. "You don't get to tell me how to grieve. You don't get to tell me how to survive. Stay away from my property, Mr. Tucker. Stay away from me." She turned on her heel and mounted her horse with angry grace. Will watched her ride away into the gathering dusk, her back ramrod straight, and felt something break open in his chest. He'd been trying to help, but he'd also been a coward. He'd been hiding behind anonymity instead of being honest, afraid of her rejection, afraid of admitting that his desire to help her was tangled up with deeper feelings he had no right to harbor. That night, a cold rain started to fall. By morning, it had turned into a genuine storm. the kind that came early in the season and caught everyone unprepared. Will spent the day securing his property, bringing his cattle to lower pastures, reinforcing anything that might blow away in the wind that howled down from the mountains. Between wind gusts, he thought he heard something. He paused, listening. There it was again, someone shouting, faint and distant. He grabbed his oilskin coat and headed out into the rain, following the sound. It was Lila. She was in her corral, trying desperately to catch her milk cows and get them to shelter. The animals were spooked by the storm, running in circles, and Lila was soaked through, her hair plastered to her head, her dress heavy with water. She'd clearly been out here for some time. Lila. Will shouted over the wind. "Get inside, my cows," she shouted back. "The fence is breaking, they'll get out." Even as she spoke, a section of the old fence gave way with a crack. The cows bolted through the gap, heading for open country. Lila ran after them, but Will caught her arm. "You can't catch them on foot in this storm," he said. "You'll get lost or worse." "Let me go," she struggled against his grip. "I need those cows. I need the milk to sell. It's how I buy feed for the chickens, and the eggs pay for everything else. If I lose them, I lose everything." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Will saw the moment her pride finally shattered. She sagged against him, rain and tears mingling on her face, her whole body shaking with cold and exhaustion and the weight of trying to carry impossible burdens alone. "Come on," Will said gently. "Let's get you inside, then I'll go after the cows." "I can't." "Yes, you can. Let me help you, Lila, please. Just this once, let someone help you." She was too cold, too tired to fight anymore. She let him guide her to her small house, let him settle her in a chair by the fireplace where a few coals still glowed. He built up the fire while she sat there shivering, staring at nothing. "There's a quilt on my bed," she said quietly. "In the other room." Will found it, a beautiful pattern of interlocking rings that someone had clearly spent months creating. He wrapped it around her shoulders, then checked her small stove. There was coffee in the pot, cold but still good. He heated it up, added sugar from the supplies he'd had George deliver, and pressed the warm cup into her hands. "Drink," he said. "Warm up, I'm going after your cows." "Will." It was the first time she'd used his given name. "You don't have to, I know," he said, meeting her eyes. "But I'm going to anyway." He went back out into the storm. It took him 3 hours to find both cows and drive them back to Lila's property. He put them in her barn, which was sturdier than the corral, fed them hay from her dwindling supply, and made sure they had water. Then he spent another 2 hours in the pouring rain, repairing the fence well enough to hold until the storm passed. By the time he finished, it was nearly dark. He was soaked through, cold to the bone and exhausted. He thought about just riding home, but he needed to check on Lila first. He knocked on her door, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. She opened it, still wrapped in the quilt, but her hair was drying in dark waves around her face, and some color had returned to her cheeks. "The cows are in the barn," he said. "Fence is patched. It won't hold forever, but it'll do until I can do a proper job." "You should come in," she said. "You'll catch your death. I should get home." "Will Tucker, for once in your life, accept some help when it's offered." Despite everything, he smiled. He came inside, dripping water on her floor. She disappeared into the bedroom and came back with a towel and what looked like one of Thomas's old shirts. "Change out of that wet shirt," she said, turning her back to give him privacy. "I'll make soup." They didn't talk much while she cooked. Will changed into the dry shirt, which was slightly too small across the shoulders, and hung his wet clothes near the fire. The soup was simple, just vegetables and a little bit of salt pork, but it was hot and filling. They sat at her small table, eating in companionable silence while the storm raged outside. "I'm sorry," Lila said finally. For what I said to you, for being angry about the help. You had a right to be. I should have been honest from the start. Why weren't you?" Will set down his spoon, considering the question. "Because I knew you'd refuse if you knew it was coming from me, and because I'm a coward." That's the last word I'd use to describe you. It's true, though. I've been watching you since before Thomas died, Lila. Watching you and feeling things I had no business feeling. After he passed, I wanted to help you, but I also wanted to be near you, and I knew that wasn't appropriate. So I hid behind anonymity. I convinced myself I was being noble, but really I was just being selfish and afraid. Lila was quiet for a long moment. "I knew," she said softly. "Knew what? That you were watching me. Before Thomas died, I felt it. Sometimes I'd be in town and I'd look up and see you looking away like you just turned your head. Or I'd be in my garden and have this feeling that someone was nearby." She met his eyes. "I told myself I was imagining things, but I wasn't, was I?" "No," Will admitted. "You weren't. Thomas knew too. He told me once that Will Tucker was a good man, and that if anything ever happened to him, I could trust you. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. Now I think I do. I never would have, I know. That's why he trusted you." She reached across the table, hesitated, then placed her hand over his. "I've been so angry. At God for taking Thomas. At the world for being so hard. At myself for not being strong enough to handle it all. And at you for being kind when I wanted to prove I didn't need kindness. But I'm tired of being angry. I'm tired of being alone." Will turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers. "You don't have to be. It's only been 6 months. People will talk. People are already talking. George saw to that." She laughed, a real laugh that lit up her whole face. "That man couldn't keep a secret if his life depended on it." "No," Will agreed. "But he's got a good heart." The storm blew itself out overnight. Will slept in Thomas's old chair by the fire, wrapped in a spare blanket while Lila took her bed. In the morning, the sky was clear and bright, the desert scrubbed clean by the rain. Lila made coffee and biscuits, and they ate breakfast together as the sun rose over the mountains. "I need to check my property," Will said, "but I'll come back this afternoon if that's all right. Help you rebuild that fence properly." "I'd like that," Lila said. "And Will, thank you for everything." He rode home with her thanks warming him more than the morning sun. His ranch had weathered the storm well, though he spent the morning cleaning up downed branches and checking on his cattle. True to his word, he rode back to Lila's place that afternoon, bringing proper fence posts and good wire. Lila worked alongside him, handing him tools, holding posts steady while he set them. She changed into an old pair of men's trousers under her skirt, practical for the work, and her hair was tied back in a simple braid. They worked well together, falling into an easy rhythm, and Will found himself thinking about how natural it felt, how right. Over the following weeks, Will became a regular presence at Lila's ranch. He helped her repair the barn, showed her how to preserve vegetables for the winter, brought over one of his bulls to breed with her cows to ensure she'd have milk through next year. In return, she cooked him dinner, mended his shirts, and slowly, carefully, let down the walls she'd built around her heart. The town watched with interest and varying degrees of approval. Most folks were happy to see the young widow finding help and maybe something more. A few clucked their tongues about propriety and decent mourning periods. But this was Hillsborough, New Mexico Territory in 1882. And life was too hard and too short for people to judge others too harshly for seeking happiness where they could find it. It was late November when Will finally kissed her. They'd been in her barn, checking on a cow that was close to calving. The birth went smoothly and they stood together watching the newborn calf struggle to its feet, Lila's shoulder pressed against Will's arm. "It's a miracle every time," Lila said softly. "New life, new beginnings." Will turned to look at her, at the soft expression on her face, the way the lamplight caught in her hair. "Lila," he said, "I need to tell you something." She looked up at him, and there was no fear in her eyes, no defensiveness, just openness and a question. "I'm in love with you," he said. "I know it's too soon. I know people will say I'm disrespecting Thomas's memory, but I can't keep pretending that I'm just being neighborly. I'm here because I need to be near you. I'm here because when I'm with you, everything makes sense. I'm here because I love you, and I think maybe I have for a long time." Lila reached up, cupping his face with her work-roughened hand. "Thomas was a good man," she said. "I loved him. I'll always love him in a way, but he's gone and I'm still here. I'm still alive. And I think maybe I'm in love with you too, Will Tucker. I think maybe that's why I was so angry when I found out about your help, because it meant something. You meant something, and I wasn't ready for that. And now I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm ready to surrender." He kissed her then, gentle and sure, his hands settling on her waist while her fingers tangled in his hair. It was a kiss full of promise, of possibilities, of two people who'd found each other despite loss and pride and fear. They courted properly after that, or as properly as circumstances allowed. Will took Lila to the harvest festival in town, where they danced under strings of lanterns while a fiddle band played. He sat with her in church on Sundays, enduring the stares and whispers with quiet dignity. She visited his ranch, admiring the improvements he'd made, the cattle he'd raised, imagining herself as part of it all. In January, the first snow fell heavy and thick, blanketing the desert in white. Will rode to Lila's ranch to find her struggling with frozen water lines. He spent the day helping her, and when it was too dark and too cold to safely ride home, she invited him to stay. They sat by her fire, drinking whiskey-laced coffee, talking about everything and nothing. "Marry me," Will said suddenly. Lila looked at him over the rim of her cup. "That's quite a proposal, Mr. Tucker. I mean it. I know we haven't been courting long by conventional standards, but I know what I want. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're beside me. I want to combine our ranches, build something bigger and better together. I want to give you children if you want them. I want to grow old with you, Lila Warren. Say yes." "People will talk," she said, but she was smiling. "Let them talk. Do you love me? You know I do. Then say yes." She set down her coffee cup and moved to sit in his lap, her arms around his neck. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, I'll marry you, Will Tucker." They were married in February. A small ceremony in the Hillsborough church with George Martinez standing up as Will's best man and Sarah Chen, Lila's closest friend in town, as her matron of honor. Lila wore a simple blue dress, her mother's pearl earrings, and a smile that could have lit up the whole territory. Will wore his best suit and couldn't stop staring at his bride like she was the eighth wonder of the world. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about the trials they'd faced together on the frontier, about building a life in harsh and beautiful country. Will slipped a gold band on Lila's finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother. Lila placed one on his, a new ring she'd bought with money saved from her egg sales. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Will kissed her with such tenderness that more than a few people in the congregation got misty-eyed. They held a small reception at George's store, which he'd cleared of merchandise for the occasion. There was music and dancing, food and drink, and the genuine warmth of a community celebrating with two of their own. As Will spun Lila around the makeshift dance floor, he caught her looking at him with such joy that his heart felt too big for his chest. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I thought I'd ever be again," she said honestly. "Scared too." "Of what?" "Of losing this. Of losing you. Of being happy and having it ripped away." Will pulled her closer. "We can't control the future, Lila. All we can do is love each other as hard as we can for as long as we're given. And I promise you, every day we have, I'm going to love you with everything I am." "That's all I need," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "That's more than enough." They combined their ranches, as Will had proposed. Lila's small property became an extension of Will's larger operation. They kept her house for hired hands when they eventually could afford to hire help, but Lila moved into Will's ranch house, the place that would become their home. The first few months of marriage were an adjustment. They learned each other's habits, their rhythms, the small intimacies of sharing a life. Lila learned that Will sang off-key in the morning while he shaved. Will learned that Lila talked to the chickens like they were children. They learned how to fight fair, how to apologize, how to forgive. They learned each other's bodies with patience and wonder, finding joy and comfort in the marriage bed. Spring brought new calves and hard work. They worked side by side from sunup to sundown, building their ranch into something prosperous. Will taught Lila how to rope and brand. She taught him her mother's recipes, transforming simple ingredients into meals that made the long days worthwhile. One morning in late May, Lila woke up feeling queasy. She tried to hide it from Will, but he noticed her pushing away her breakfast, saw her turn pale at the smell of the coffee she usually loved. "You feeling all right?" he asked, concern creasing his brow. "Fine," she said. "Just a little off." But it continued for days, and Lila began to suspect the truth. She rode into town to see Dr. Patterson, an elderly man who'd been delivering babies in the territory for 30 years. He confirmed what she'd already known in her heart. She was pregnant. Lila rode home in a daze, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach, wondering how to tell Will. Part of her was thrilled. Part of her was terrified. She'd seen women die in childbirth, seen the dangers of bringing life into a world that could be so cruel. But she also thought of that newborn calf in her barn, struggling to stand, determined to live. She thought of new beginnings and second chances. Will was in the corral when she got home, working with a young horse. She stood by the fence, watching him, this man she loved, trying to imagine him as a father. It wasn't hard. He was patient with the animals, gentle but firm, and she knew he'd be the same with a child. "Will," she called out, "can you come here a minute?" He gave the horse a final pat and vaulted over the fence with easy grace. "What is it? You're looking flushed. Are you sick?" "No," she said, taking his hands in hers. "I'm pregnant." Will's expression went through a dozen changes in as many seconds. Shock, wonder, fear, joy, all chasing across his face until finally settling on pure happiness. He let out a whoop that startled the horses, swept Lila up in his arms, and spun her around. "We're having a baby," he said, setting her down carefully, suddenly conscious of her condition. "We're really having a baby, according to Dr. Patterson, yes, probably due in late December or early January." "A New Year's baby," Will said, grinning. "Lila, this is incredible. Are you happy? Are you scared? How are you feeling?" "All of those things," she admitted, "but mostly happy. Mostly excited to meet our child." Will placed his hand gently on her stomach, and Lila covered it with her own. They stood there in the afternoon sun, two people who'd found each other through loss and pride and ultimately love, starting a new chapter together. The pregnancy progressed well through the summer heat and into the cooling days of autumn. Lila's body changed, her belly growing round and full. Will was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worried she was doing too much. They argued about it more than once. "I'm pregnant, not broken," Lila said one day in September when Will tried to stop her from mucking out the barn. "I know that, but you shouldn't be doing heavy labor. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still doing their work. I'm fine, Will." "Humor me," he said, taking the pitchfork from her hands. "Please, I can't lose you, and there it was, the fear beneath his protectiveness. Lila softened, touching his face. "You're not going to lose me. I'm strong, and Dr. Patterson says everything is progressing perfectly. But I understand you're worried. How about this? I'll avoid the heavy work if you promise to stop hovering every second of the day." "Deal," Will said, kissing her forehead. "But I reserve the right to hover a little bit." As Lila's due date approached, Will became even more nervous. He'd helped deliver dozens of calves and foals, but the idea of his wife going through labor terrified him. He made sure Dr. Patterson knew exactly where their ranch was and how to get there. He prepared a room in the house with everything Lila might need. He even rode all the way to Santa Fe to buy her a proper birthing chair when he heard they were safer than lying down. "You're going to wear a path in the floorboards," Lila said one evening in late December, watching him pace. She was huge now, uncomfortable, ready for the baby to come. "Sit down, please. You're making me nervous." Will sat beside her on the sofa they'd bought in the fall, taking her hand. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I know I am too." "What if something goes wrong? Then we'll deal with it together," Lila said. "But Will, you have to trust that I can do this. Women's bodies are made for this. My body knows what to do. I couldn't bear it if I lost you. You know that, don't you? You're everything to me." Lila turned awkwardly, her belly making movement difficult, and took his face in both hands. "Listen to me. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to have this baby, and then we're going to raise them together. We're going to watch them grow up, teach them to ride, send them to school. We're going to have a whole life together, we'll tucker, and I refuse to let fear rob us of the joy of this moment. Do you hear me?" "I hear you," he said, kissing her palms. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Good," she said, smiling. "That's how it should be." Labor started 2 days after Christmas, during a cold snap that had ice forming in the water troughs. Lila woke before dawn with the first pains, knowing immediately what they meant. She let Will sleep for another hour while the contractions were still far apart, watching him in the dim light filtering through the window, memorizing his face. When the pains grew stronger and closer together, she shook him awake gently. "Will, it's time." He was up immediately, all traces of sleep vanishing. "I'll get the doctor." "Not yet. It's early still. But you could make a fire, heat water, just like when the cows give birth, remember?" Will moved through the house mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. Lila timed her contractions, walked around the house when she could, rested when she needed to. By mid-morning, the pains were intense enough that Will insisted on riding for Dr. Patterson. The doctor arrived by early afternoon, a calm presence in his worn black bag and gentle hands. He examined Lila and pronounced everything progressing normally, though it would likely be several more hours. Will stayed by Lila's side, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her forehead, murmuring encouragement. The hours blurred together, pain and rest and pain again. Lila had never known anything could hurt like this, but she also felt powerful, primal, connected to every woman who'd ever brought life into the world. Will's presence anchored her, his voice calling her back when the pain threatened to pull her under. As twilight painted the sky purple and gold, Dr. Patterson told her it was time to push. Lila bore down with everything she had, feeling like she was being split in two, hearing herself make sounds she didn't recognize. Will was beside her, his face pale but steady, telling her she could do this, she was strong, she was amazing. And then, after one final monumental effort, there was a baby's cry filling the room. "It's a boy," Dr. Patterson said, holding up a red, squalling infant. "A healthy boy." Lila collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and elated. Will was laughing and crying at the same time, staring at his son with absolute wonder. The doctor cleaned the baby efficiently, wrapped him in a blanket Lila had made during the long summer evenings, and placed him in her arms. He was perfect, tiny and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn from baby blue to something else in time. He had Will's nose and Lila's chin and his own fierce determination, already rooting around for milk. "Hello, little one," Lila whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Will reached out with one finger, stroking the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "He's so small." "He won't be for long," Dr. Patterson said, packing up his instruments. "They grow fast. What are you calling him?" Lila and Will looked at each other. They discussed names but never quite settled on one. But looking at their son now, the answer seemed obvious. "James," Lila said. "James Thomas Tucker." Will's eyes glistened at the inclusion of her first husband's name. "That's perfect," he said hoarsely. "James Thomas Tucker. Welcome to the world, son." Dr. Patterson left them alone after ensuring both mother and baby were stable. Will helped Lila get James to latch on for his first feeding, marveling at the tiny fingers that gripped his thumb, the little sounds the baby made, the realness of him. "We made him," Will said in awe. "Look at what we made, Lila." "I know," she said, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. Happy tears, overwhelmed tears, tears of relief and joy and love so intense it hurt. "I know." That first night neither of them slept much. James needed to eat often, and both Will and Lila were too enchanted to want to miss a moment. They took turns holding him, studying every detail of his face, arguing gently about who he looked like more. As January turned into February, and then March, they settled into the rhythm of life with a baby. It was exhausting and messy and more wonderful than either of them could have imagined. Will discovered he had a talent for getting James to sleep, walking the floor with him in the middle of the night, singing those same off-key songs that Lila loved. Lila learned to nurse while doing everything else she needed to do, James strapped to her chest in a wrap her friend Sarah had given her. The ranch prospered. With the money they'd saved and the combined resources of their properties, they hired 2 ranch hands to help with the heavy work. It freed up time for Will to spend with his family, to watch his son grow from a helpless infant into a baby who smiled and laughed and eventually sat up on his own. On their first anniversary, Will surprised Lila with a gift. It was a deed to the combined property, with both their names on it. "I had it drawn up legal," he said. "Everything we have, we own together, equal partners in everything." Lila looked at the paper, then at her husband. "This is your family's land, your legacy. And now it's our family's land, our legacy. Yours, mine, and James's. And any other children we might have." "You want more?" Lila asked, smiling. "Maybe, someday, do you?" "I think I might," she admitted. "I always wanted a big family, and James could use a sibling or 2. Will pulled her close, James between them in Lila's arms, their own small family circle. "I never thought I could be this happy," he said. "I never thought I deserved it." "You deserve every good thing," Lila said firmly. "You're a good man, Will Tucker, the best man I know." They kissed over their son's head, sealing promises old and new. The years unfolded like the pages of a well-loved book. James grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's determination and his mother's green eyes. When he was 2, Lila became pregnant again, delivering a daughter they named Emma Grace in the summer of 1885. Emma had Will's blonde hair and Lila's delicate features, and she was doted on by both her parents and her big brother. The ranch continued to thrive. Will's reputation as an honest rancher spread, and he was able to sell his cattle for top dollar. Lila started raising chickens on a larger scale, selling eggs and birds throughout the territory. They added on to the house, building more bedrooms and a proper dining room. They weren't rich by anyone's standards, but they were comfortable and secure in ways that once seemed impossible. In 1887, when James was 4 and Emma was 2, Lila became pregnant a third time. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and Dr. Patterson, now quite elderly, warned her to take it easy. Will insisted she rest, taking over many of her chores and hiring Sarah Chen's daughter to help with the children. Their third child, a son they named Henry William, was born in April of 1888. The birth was long and difficult, and afterward Dr. Patterson told them privately that Lila shouldn't have any more children. It was too dangerous, her body had been through enough. 3 is a good number, Will said that night, holding Henry while Lila recovered. 3 is perfect. No regrets, Lila asked. You might have wanted more. I want you alive and well, Will said firmly. I want you here to help me raise these 3 beautiful children. That's all I want. Lila touched his face, loving him more than ever. 3 is perfect, she agreed. The children grew up with the ranch, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with chores appropriate to their ages, attending the small schoolhouse in Hillsborough. James was serious and responsible, already showing signs of the rancher he'd become. Emma was bright and curious, always asking questions, always exploring. Henry was the charmer, able to talk his way out of trouble with a smile. Will and Lila watched their children grow with pride and occasional terror. They nursed them through childhood illnesses, celebrated their achievements, disciplined them when necessary, and loved them fiercely. They also made time for each other, stealing moments alone, remembering that before they were parents, they were husband and wife. On their 10th anniversary, they left the children with Sarah and rode out to the place where their properties had once divided. The creek still ran through it, cottonwoods providing shade, but everything else had changed. Fences ran in new directions. Buildings stood where there had been open ground. 2 separate struggles had merged into one thriving ranch. You ever think about how we started? Will asked, sitting with Lila on a blanket by the creek. How stubborn you were, how interfering you were, Lila countered, laughing. I prefer to think of it as persistent. You were sneaky, paying George to lie for you. Best money I ever spent, Will said, pulling her close. Except for the ring I bought you and the birthing chair and that new stove you wanted. Flatterer, Lila said, but she was smiling. She looked at her husband, seeing the gray threading through his blonde hair, the lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the strength in his hands that had built so much of their life. I was so scared back then, so determined not to need anyone. You were grieving, you were hurt. You had every right to your feelings. But I was wrong too, about pride being all I had left. I had more, I just couldn't see it yet. What changed? Will asked, though he knew the answer. You changed everything. You showed me that accepting help wasn't weakness. That letting someone in didn't mean losing myself. That surrender wasn't the same as defeat. Will kissed her temple. You surrendered and I fell harder than I already had. Best trade I ever made. They lay back on the blanket, watching clouds drift across the blue New Mexico sky, listening to the creek burble past. After a while, Lila spoke again. Thank you, she said, for not giving up on me, for seeing past the walls I'd built, for loving me anyway. Nothing could have stopped me from loving you, Will said. From the first time I saw you in town, laughing at something Thomas said, your whole face lit up. I was gone. I tried to fight it, tried to ignore it, but it was inevitable. You were inevitable. We were inevitable, Lila corrected. Both of us together, this life we've built. Yes, Will agreed. We were. They rode home as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. Smoke rose from their chimney, a sign that Sarah had started dinner. They could hear the children's voices as they approached, James calling out that his parents were home, Emma and Henry running to meet them. Will and Lila dismounted, gathering their children in their arms, feeling the weight and warmth of them, the reality of the family they'd created. They walked into their house together, into the light and laughter and chaos of their life, and Lila thought about surrender again. She'd surrendered her pride and found partnership. She'd surrendered her fear and found love. She'd surrendered her isolation and found family. And in surrendering, she'd gained everything. Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the steady growth of their children. James, at 16, was already taller than his father and took on increasing responsibility at the ranch. He had a good head for business and a natural way with cattle. Emma, at 14, divided her time between helping her mother and studying with an intensity that suggested she might want more than ranch life could offer. Henry, at 12, was discovering that his charm worked on girls his age, much to his parents' amusement and slight concern. Will had begun to slow down a bit, though he'd never admit it. At 48, he still worked hard every day, but Lila noticed he favored his left knee when it rained and needed reading glasses for anything with small print. She was 45, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her hands showing the work of 2 decades on the frontier. But when Will looked at her, his eyes still held the same wonder they had that first day he'd kissed her in the barn. One evening in the summer of 1898, they sat on the porch they'd added to the house years ago, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The children were inside, arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to do dishes. It was a sound Lila had learned to love, the noise of a full house, a full life. "I've been thinking," Will said, reaching for her hand. "That's always dangerous," Lila teased. "Serious now." "I've been thinking about what comes next. James is nearly grown. In a few years, Emma and Henry will be 2. The ranch is doing well. We've built something solid here." "We have," Lila agreed. "What are you getting at?" "I think we should start transitioning things to James. Teaching him not just the work but the business side, the decision-making. He's ready for it." "You're not talking about retiring, are you? Because I can't see you sitting idle." "Not retiring exactly, but maybe stepping back a bit, spending more time on the things we've put off. I'd like to take you to San Francisco like we've talked about, maybe even back east to see where my grandparents came from. We've worked hard, Lila. Maybe it's time to enjoy the fruits of that work." Lila squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength still there despite the years. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like it very much, but Will—" "Yes. Wherever we go, whatever we do, this is home, right here with you. That's all I really need." "I know," Will said, bringing her hand to his lips. "But you deserve more than what you need. You deserve everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had watched over them through years of struggle and triumph, loss and love. Inside, the argument over dishes had resolved itself, and they could hear Emma at the piano they'd bought her, playing a Chopin nocturne with skill that still amazed them. "You ever think about Thomas?" Will asked quietly. It was a question he'd asked before over the years, secure enough in their love to honor the man who'd come before him. "Sometimes," Lila admitted. "Usually when I look at James and see some expression that reminds me of him, I think about what his life might have been if he'd lived. But Will, I don't spend time wishing things were different. I can't regret the path that led me to you even if it was paved with loss." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Will said. "Because I feel the same way. I'm sorry he died. Sorry you had to go through that pain. But I can't be sorry for the life we've built. Nor should you be. Thomas would have liked you, you know. He was a good judge of character. He saw something in you that day you helped us with the wagon wheel in town. Do you remember?" "I remember," Will said. "He thanked me and you smiled at me, and I think that's when I first fell in love with you. over a broken wagon wheel and a smile. Such small moments, Lila mused. Such enormous consequences. The door opened behind them and James stepped out. He'd grown into a handsome young man with his mother's dark hair and his father's steady blue eyes. "Ma, Pa," he said, "we're heading to bed. Early start tomorrow with that fence repair in the north pasture. We'll be in soon," Will said. "Sleep well, son." After James went back inside, Will stood, offering his hand to Lila. "Come on, Mrs. Tucker. Let's go to bed too. I'm not as young as I used to be." "Neither of us are," Lila said, taking his hand and letting him pull her up. "But we're still here, still together." "Always," Will promised, just as he had countless times before. "Always together." They walked into their home, turning off the lamps, checking that the stove was banked for the night, pausing to look in on their sleeping children. These small rituals of a shared life, performed thousands of times over the years, each one precious, each one a choice to love and be loved. In their bedroom, Lila sat at her dressing table, taking down her hair. Will watched her in the mirror, thinking about the first time he'd seen her hair loose, the night of the storm when everything had changed. She caught him looking and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How lucky I am, how grateful." "Me too," Lila said. She turned to face him. "Will Tucker, you were the best thing that ever happened to me. Even when I was too proud to see it, even when I fought you every step of the way, you were always the best thing." "You're going to make me cry, woman," Will said, his voice rough with emotion. "Good," Lila said, rising to meet him. "Cry with me. Laugh with me. Just be with me for whatever time we have left." "That's all I've ever wanted," Will said, taking her in his arms. "From the day you told me to stay away from your property until now, that's all I've ever wanted. Just you, Lila, just us." They held each other in the quiet of their room. Two people who'd found each other through impossible circumstances, who'd built a life from stubbornness and determination and love. Outside, the New Mexico night settled over their ranch, over the land they'd worked and fought for and finally made their own. The years ahead would bring changes, as years always do. James would marry and bring his own children into the world. Emma would surprise them all by becoming a teacher, bringing education to ranching families throughout the territory. Henry would try his hand at various ventures before finally settling into helping his brother run the family ranch. Will and Lila would take their trip to San Francisco, marveling at the city and the ocean, holding hands like newlyweds while their grown children ran the ranch. They'd return grateful for the adventure but happy to be home, to the life they'd built, to the land they loved. They'd grow old together, Will's hair going white, Lila moving a bit slower but still sharp as ever. They'd sit on their porch and watch their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had played. They'd tell stories about the old days, about the widow who was too proud to ask for help and the cowboy who helped anyway, about the day she finally surrendered and everything that came after. And every night, until the very last one, they'd go to bed together, grateful for one more day, one more chance to love each other, one more piece of the beautiful, hard, wonderful life they'd created together. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the pride that had nearly kept them apart, not the grief that had threatened to consume her, not the fear that had made him hesitate. What mattered was the love that had overcome all of it, the partnership they'd forged, the family they'd raised, and the choice they made every single day to keep choosing each other. In a small cemetery outside Hillsboro, New Mexico, many years later, two headstones would stand side by side. The dates would show long lives, well lived. But that was all far in the future. On this night, Will and Lila Tucker simply held each other, breathing in sync, hearts beating together, and felt the profound peace that comes from being exactly where you're meant to be, with exactly who you're meant to be with, living exactly the life you were meant to live. "I love you," Lila whispered in the darkness. "I love you too," Will whispered back. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. Promise, promise." And it was a promise he kept every single day for the rest of their lives. Just as she kept her promise to him, the unspoken vow that had begun the day she stopped fighting and finally let herself be loved. The day the proud widow became the cherished wife. The day two separate lives became one beautiful shared journey through all the challenges and joys that the wild, wonderful frontier had to offer. Their story became legend in Hillsborough, passed down through generations as an example of perseverance and love. People would point out the Tucker Ranch, still thriving under the care of their descendants, and tell newcomers about how it all started, about the woman who thought she had to do everything alone and the man who showed her a better way. But the real story, the true heart of it, wasn't in the grand gestures or the dramatic moments. It was in the quiet choices made every day. The choice to help when help was refused. The choice to accept help when pride screamed to refuse it. The choice to love when loss had made loving feel impossible. The choice to build when it would have been easier to give up. The choice to surrender not in defeat, but in trust, opening your heart to someone even when you knew how much it could hurt. Those were the choices that built a life. Those were the moments that mattered. And Will and Lila Tucker knew it, lived it, and passed that knowledge down to their children and their children's children, a legacy more valuable than land or cattle or gold. As the 19th century drew to a close and a new one dawned, the Tucker Ranch stood as proof that love could conquer pride, that partnership could overcome hardship, and that sometimes the best thing you could do was stop trying to do everything alone and let someone help carry the load. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, perhaps Thomas Warren smiled, knowing that the woman he'd loved had found happiness again, that the man he'd trusted had kept faith with that trust, and that the life Lila had built on the ashes of loss was good and full and exactly what she deserved. The desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of sage and creosote. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance. And in a small ranch house in New Mexico territory, two people who'd found each other against all odds slept peacefully, wrapped in each other's arms, dreaming of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that, knowing that whatever came, they'd face it together. That was their story. That was their truth. And it was, in every way that mattered, a perfect ending to a beautiful beginning, a complete circle of loss and love, pride and surrender, loneliness and partnership. The widow had been too proud to ask for help. The cowboy had helped anyway. And in the end, when she finally surrendered, she found not defeat but triumph, not weakness but strength, not the end of her story but the beginning of their story. A tale of love in the Wild West that would endure long after the frontier itself had faded into history.